is an airline pilot and also worked for ASA as a flight simulator and human factors instructor and examiner. And after retiring from active flying, Ciaran qualified as a lead safety auditor for IATA, and he continues to conduct safety audits around the world. And he's the founder of TCAS, Training Consultancy Auditing Services, where he provides advice to professions and industries who take the safety of their personnel and those in their care seriously. And I've worked with Ciaran for well over 10 years now on our diploma in leadership and quality improvement, where he's contributed significantly to our patient safety program, and brought his experience and that of aviation to our safety perspectives. And I think it's that different perspectives in safety that brings a lot of learning, and the idea that we can take good ideas and adapt them for healthcare, I think is really important. So Ciaran, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to QPS Talk Time, and I'm going to let you just maybe open our conversation with a few of your thoughts on aviation and healthcare over the last number of years.
Good afternoon, John, and thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. And I use the word specifically to indicate that we really are all colleagues when it comes to safety, even though we're in very different professions and very different human endeavors. But we do have a lot in common. And your question, your opening question there, I think was very good, because it highlighted the fact that this conversation that we're going to be broadly speaking about during the talk times today, it's a conversation that is two-way. You know, we share information with each other, and loosely I'm going to talk about my 15-year involvement in this conversation, but it's an interface that has been going on for over 40 years. I'll very briefly and loosely talk about how this conversation, this interface began, why it began, what I see as the benefits that have come out of it for both professions, and where I imagine and anticipate the conversation is going to go. So if we start with where it all began, I'm kind of covering ground that has been covered already in a previous QPS Talk Time with Dr. Paul O'Connor and Dr. Angelo O'D when they introduced the HSE guide, an introduction to human factors for healthcare workers. And Paul covered the origins of human factors. So there may be a little bit of duplication in this particular area and in other areas as we go along. But what you see on the screen now is a measure really of how aviation safety has improved. It is one way of measuring the safety improvement that we have witnessed over the last 40 to 50 years. So basically the graph is showing a measure that we use. It's the annual fatal accident rate. So it's the number of fatal accidents per 1 million flights. So you can see pretty starkly indicated on the graph that way back in 1959, when records began, there were, we were a blue line and a red line indicating the rest of the world and the US and Canada, but we're looking at about 35 fatal accidents per 1 million flights. A sharp drop then during the first decade of commercial aviation in the 60s, and bringing us right up to date, up to 2020. The rate has dropped from 35 fatal accidents per million flights down to 0.12 currently. So that's a remarkable improvement in that particular statistic. Moving along from left to right, that sharp decline in the first decade in the 60s is primarily down to technical innovations and improvements in design, in components, and the incorporation of fail-safe design philosophy in construction and component design. there was a kind of a plateau then in the 70s, and that decade, in terms of the number of fatalities, the number of people who lost their lives in aircraft accidents, the 70s is the deadliest decade. And then moving right up to contemporary, 2017 was the safest year in aviation's history, with 10 fatal accidents. But the number of passengers that traveled in 2017 was 4.5 billion. 4.5 billion passengers traveled in 2017. There were 44 fatalities. So in a way, this is a snapshot of what has happened in terms of safety over a period of 40 years. In terms of this conversation, the conversation and the interface between healthcare and aviation can be traced back to the late 70s and early 80s, where, having achieved such remarkable improvements in the 1960s, people began to wonder why there was this plateau in the 70s. Why, after all these innovations, were accidents still happening? And NASA became involved, and NASA managed to identify that 80% of the accidents, 80+% of the accidents that were happening were due to human error. And this was a shocking wake-up call for the industry. And with some reluctance, we realized we had to address this indisputable statistic. So we got to work on dealing with this human error crisis. And this is where the interface started, because we just weren't equipped to deal with this new challenge. And we had to reach out beyond our industry to find the solutions and the support to address these human behavior issues. And that really 45 years ago is when the interface started. My involvement started about 15 years ago, and that's where the 15 years in the title comes from. I noted from Paul O'Connor's presentation that he said, with high-risk industries, it takes a disaster for people to start refocusing on these human factors issues, and that has been our experience. We have a disaster, we learn from that, we incorporate new human behavior training and procedures and policies, and then we move on to the next disaster. But talking about where I think the benefits have occurred from this conversation that we have between the two professions, there are 4 areas I think would be worth looking at, and they come up again and again during the discussion. So the first is, if Naomi, if you could go on to the next slide, please. In the late 70s, there were 2 pretty horrific accidents. One in Tenerife, where 2 Boeing 747s crashed into each other, and there were 583 fatalities in that. The headlines and the industry focus was on pilot error after that. Shortly afterwards, in 1978, there was a further accident where again pilot error seemed to be the cause. And as a result of these 2 accidents, the efforts in terms of managing safety were focused on getting pilots to try and eliminate error. The pilot body took exception to that, really, because the focus was specifically on a very, very small defined area of a big complex industry. So the safety management system then decided, right, let's broaden it and not use the term pilot error. Let's talk about human error. So the safety management systems, their focus became trying to eliminate pilot error. The progress then over the next 40 decades saw a radical change in that way of thinking. And we've arrived now at the stage where the industry accepts, I won't say that we're comfortable with, but we accept that as long as humans are involved in the endeavor, there will be error. We've also acknowledged that we will never eliminate, or we will never get to zero human error. It's an aspiration, but we acknowledge that it can never be achieved. That's just the nature of human beings.
Yeah.
So the focus now has switched to trying to mitigate error. So that's the first area I think that there's a lot of common ground, and it comes up again and again in the discussion. The second area is where we have developed and matured our human factors training programs. Initially, again, because the focus seemed to be on eliminating pilot error, human factors training was provided solely for cockpit crew, for pilots. And again, over 40 years, that has expanded hugely. Cabin crew are now involved, maintenance personnel, air traffic control. The bigger team are also receiving regular and routine human factors training. And I think that's an acknowledgement that it's not just at the sharp end where humans are involved. It's throughout the organization. And humans at every level are prone to making errors. So again, Paul, in his presentation, in defining human factors and human behavior training and what we now call crew resource management, the risk is that it becomes very narrowly focused on teamwork and decision-making, situational awareness, threat and error management, but it's much broader than that. Human factors training has implications for design, for quality, for efficiency, and safety in general. So it's a very, very broad topic. And we have now reached the stage where the traditional skills that were educated and expected of pilots, they're now 50% of the training, and the remaining 50% is the focus on the soft skills, on all those human behavior topics that come under the human factors umbrella. So that has been a remarkable change. When I joined aviation in the late 70s, the technical skills were 100% of initial and recurrent training. It's gone from that over 45 years to 50% technical skills and 50% human factor skills. With regard to the progress in healthcare, John, you and your colleagues would obviously be more aware of where you have arrived at and where you are currently with regard to the depth of human factors training that's provided for your personnel. But there are other areas where I've seen huge advancements. So simulator training in particular has been a key feature of our both technical and human factors training platforms. And it's something that I see being incorporated more and more in healthcare. And there are certainly indications of excellence and surpassing a lot of what we've done when it comes to your embracing of simulator training, particularly over in Galway, in RCSI, and I believe down in Cork also, though I'm not directly aware. But you really made remarkable advances, advances that it took us 20, 30 years to achieve. So certainly hats off to you there. But other improvements I listed, the use of checklists, I think starting with the World Health Organization surgical checklist, that initiative has spawned many, many more checklists, and I think they're being incorporated more and more. Briefings, huddles, handovers are all areas where I think the sharing of information and experience has benefited both professions. Third area where I think I see this conversation bringing up a topic frequently is in the area of, I think probably next slide, Naomi. oh yeah, just before I go on to talk about a just culture, it needs to be borne in mind that whilst an impression may be out there that aviation embraced all these safety initiatives, it did take time. And certainly from my own specific profession's point of view, pilots were a very, very conservative, comfortable group of individuals within the industry. In the 70s, very satisfied with the culture, the safety culture, and the method of operating. So when experts from outside our industry started to suggest areas where we needed improvement, particularly in the human behavior area, there was phenomenal resistance. And it took really a generation of pilots to move on before a new generation came along and, faced with the indisputable evidence that I'd referred to already, started to embrace the advice that was given by particularly the field of psychology in terms of how to recognize human behaviors that were safety risky. So, yeah, but the introduction of human factors training was only one area, one safety improvement that pilots resisted. We resisted automation. We resisted autopilots. We resisted the automation of our engines. We resisted moving from analog instruments to digital instruments. We objected to doing joint safety training with our cabin crew. 50 years on now, it seems ridiculous that we would take that stance. But I think the cartoon there, it just highlights how we've moved along. But now we realize that all these well-intentioned innovations, we should really have incorporated a lot earlier. Next, Naomi, please. Yeah, so another area of common ground is the whole area of a just culture. Initially, again, we used the wrong terminology. We talked about a no-blame culture. We dropped that fairly smartly because, you know, people who go out and deliberately violate procedures to intentionally do harm, they need to be treated and handled differently to the rest of us who make genuine human mistakes day in, day out. So we have a pretty robust reporting culture. I've often been asked, where does that come from? What are the origins? Why are we so good at it? The only reason I can think of is way back pre-commercial aviation, in the war years where aviation really was at its zenith. You know, handing over an aircraft to the next crew, you didn't want to hand over an aircraft that was faulty, where you had identified a faulty system, a faulty engine, an engine that was running a little bit rough, or flight controls that weren't just 100%. The technical log, which is a document completed by every captain at the end of a flight, would log and report any defects. And this was in our DNA, I think, reporting issues that would be of significance to the next crew. So I think it was an easy transfer for us then to move out of the technical area and start reporting other safety issues, particularly human behavior safety issues. And the last of the four innovations that I think that we've seen and that has come up again and again during the conversation is the fact that there has been another radical change in our perception and our, what would you call it, our definition of what a pilot, what the current pilot does. Again, way back in the bad old days when I started, the captain of an aircraft was considered to be the manipulator or the operator of a sophisticated machine. Now we're trying to drive home the new concept that the modern airline pilot is a manager of resources. And that word resource is the same resource that we refer to in the term crew resource management, CRM. So the manager, the modern pilot and a modern flight deck is a manager of not just the aircraft, continues to be the manager of the aircraft, but it's a manager of automated systems, a manager of a team, a manager of an environment, a manager of checklists, a manager of processes, a manager of procedures. And this is the way we need to think about when things go off the rails and when we move from normal to non-normal to emergency operations, that the pilot is a manager. And we've got to the stage now where, in addition to technical skills training, human factors training, a lot of airlines are now beginning to give management training to their pilots. So there are four areas that I've seen this conversation highlight. So next, Naomi, please. Here's a model that I could justifiably say I'm sick of now at this stage, because I've been seeing it since I first saw it back in 1981 at my first human factors training course. But I never tire of this slide. The concept is tied into a chain of errors that rarely is an accident or an incident or a near miss or an adverse event the result of one single error or one single failure. It's a series, any which of one, had they not occurred, would have stopped the event from happening. So similarly, Professor James Reason came up with the Swiss cheese model, where each slice of cheese, they're not solid slices of cheddar. He picked the Swiss model specifically because there are holes in it. So the slices represent defenses and the holes represent flaws in the defenses. And when the holes line up, a hazard becomes a failure. The difficulty with this model, and it's been highlighted to me recently, is that the last defense, we can see on this particular slide, it's human error. It's highlighted there in red as human error. And in investigations and the subsequent events after investigation of adverse events or accidents and incidents, the focus generally tends to be on that last layer of defense. It's like the person who pulls the last peg out of the Jenga structure gets all the hisses and boos because they're the one that brought the whole structure down. And this is unfortunate. I think it's a failing in this model that focus tends to be at the last level. And it would sound like me being a practitioner at the very end, the operator at the sharp end, that we get all the focus. And I started to rethink about this recently as a result of two tragedies within the industry. One is the Boeing 737 MAX saga. We don't have time to talk about that in detail. But now that that's over, technically, we can look back and see that really the focus is way back up the line at those two first slices of cheese, where there were organizational problems with the regulator, with the manufacturer, with people and organizations that we at the front end trusted implicitly. That was one example. And the other is the Irish Coast Guard Rescue 116 accident, which occurred back in another shocking human tragedy that occurred back in 2017. The final report was only published last November. And in that report, it's quite clear that whilst there was human error and the Jenga structure collapsed, way back up at the organizational level, at the very top, there were implications of failings in safety management with the Department of Transport, with the Irish Aviation Authority, with the Irish Coast Guard, and with the operator of the helicopters, CHC. So jumping ahead and talking finally about where I think things are going, I would like to see us reconsider this model. That it's very easy saying that last level of defense is all about human error and human failure. But saying that the previous 3 slices of cheese are system errors and system failures, for me, that just doesn't wash anymore. System failures are human failures because it's systems within the organization. It's the people who design the processes, the procedures, provide the support structure for us at the front line. They're humans as well. So I think really we need to start reconsidering this model and consider the human element at all those levels and all those layers of defenses. That's one of the innovation I see, and I think it's where this conversation is going to go in the future. Next slide, please, Naomi. Additionally, and tied in with what I've just been talking about, I think we're going to see more and more about the safety 2 model. It may be new to a lot of people, but we've certainly been looking at it, and I know in healthcare, John, you've done quite a lot of work with it. I know it's been discussed and introduced in St. James's in the emergency department. But essentially, without going into this graph in particular detail, what we've been doing with regard to safety up to now, we call safety 1, and it's that orange or amber zone. And that's 3% of what we do, less than 3%. About 97.5% of what we do is in the zone outside that red area. So the red area is our safety has been looking at where we do things wrong, where there are accidents, where there are incidents, adverse events, near misses. Our safety has focused on those. Safety 2 thinking is, well, what about the 97% of time we're doing things right, where we're doing things exceptionally well? Surely there's a lot of material and data and evidence that we can use there to focus on and to improve safety. I reckon that's going to be a growth area. And I think, again, this 2-way conversation, because it is 2-way, we can both learn from this and improve by looking at that huge area of time where we get things right. So rather than focusing on trying to reduce error, let's focus on trying to increase what we do right. Initially, I had difficulty with the safety 1 concept because I was thinking, well, we can't just abandon accidents and incidents and forget about them. But the proponents of safety 2 are saying, no, they run in parallel. We still must investigate where things go wrong and learn from them. But bear in mind that there is this vast area of behavior and good practice where there are invaluable lessons to be learned. And I think that brings us probably to the last slide. Yeah, so this was a snapshot I took of my own bookcase at home. And maybe it's a corny way of just saying and indicating how my profession has moved along. That the 4 books on the right of the screen are traditional technical skills books covering aerodynamics, meteorology, propulsion, hydraulics, aviation law, navigation. And that would have been my bookshelf, just those 4 back in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s. Now I have as many, although it's not shown there, I have as many human behavior books on my bookcase. The checklist manifesto there from Atul Gawande, Dr. Atul Gawande, from the medical profession, talking the same talk as we're having here, the same conversation. He's saying, let's continue this. Let's continue to talk to each other because we work in complex professions, complex human endeavors. We make mistakes. There are ways to mitigate them that we can share. He and I would certainly not be proponents of simply moving the aviation safety model into healthcare. It just doesn't work like that. But it can be adopted as you have shown with your incorporation of checklists and simulator training and the incorporation of human practice training into your toolbox. So just to conclude, medicine has been around a lot longer than commercial aviation. It has an amazing history. It has developed and evolved over centuries. Um, there are traditional methods of doing your business, carrying out your profession that have stood the test of time. Just like the first graph that I showed, you have graphs that can show. So in 1961, the infant mortality rate in Europe was 38.1 per 1,000 live births. It's now down to 3.4. Remarkable. Much of that down to, if not all, down to healthcare. In the early 19th century, the mortality, the life expectancy was about 40 years. In Europe now, it's over 80. So you too can be proud of your safety statistics and how you have evolved, and it's in the right direction. Okay, like us, there are areas that need further work, but I think to do that further work, certainly of benefit, is continuing this conversation. So thanks to the HSE, thanks to you, John, as always, and thanks to TalkTime. I think it's a terrific tool, and I hope it just grows in strength.
Thanks, Ciaran, and thank you for all those thoughts. And I'm going to encourage everybody listening just to use the chat to make some comments. And I see lots of comments coming through already. And if you have specific questions, and you know, Ciaran, I'd like to feel that we've benefited, and I think that the health services have benefited from this conversation. And I think there has been a move to incorporate more safety science ideas, of which kind of aviation has been a big contributor and driver of this, you know, and something like the patient safety strategy started to kind of include, you know, the idea you must have everybody on board, including patients and all staff. You know, you must use information to learn from it. You must use reporting. Must look at kind of common causes of error, and then I think the most important thing is how do you create that culture underlying underlying safety. And I suppose maybe that's my first question to you is what do you think the challenges are bringing something like the concepts of just culture into healthcare?
I think, and I'm making an assumption here, John, that you probably have a similar challenge to us in that, going back to that Swiss cheese model where you take the last barrier in defense, we can take that as representing the front end workers at the sharp end. Now, the people within the organization who are charged with providing us with the support to do our job, I think they need human factors training as well. It's all very well us buying into it, us seeing that on a day-to-day basis, mistakes are being made, errors are being made, there are faults in processes and procedures. The people charged with giving us the support to correct all those issues need to buy in that this is a human problem. I think having them do human factors training is important as well. And I think it's become even more problematic now because we're finding a lot of our middle and top managers are, rather than the traditional type of manager who has worked his or her way up through the organization, is very familiar with the front end and how the front end operates. We're now seeing a lot of managers coming in from A, either other industries, or B, coming straight out of college with granted phenomenal business acumen and knowledge and full of bright ideas. But when it comes to the day-to-day operation of the organization, I think there's a deficit there. So I think there are two areas that are needed. And I don't want to sound like a shop steward now, always blaming middle and top management. But it's all very well for that level of the organization having responsibility for incorporating human behavior methodologies and safety management system thinking without knowing what goes on at the front line.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think one of the kind of errors would be to say that human factors training is just for those at the front line, because it is such a system approach to safety, and safety is such a system kind of outcome that I think it's critical that everybody sees that. And human factors has, I suppose, the breadth of being able to kind of help everybody at whatever level they're at, I think, and help define what they need to do.
Well, I think one of the hopes that we have after the Boeing 737 MAX issue, because there were individuals at the top level who were identified in the investigation as not thinking about safety first, not putting safety first, putting expediency and marketing and competition and finances and greed ahead of safety. And these were human failings. So I think when it is used as a case study, it should be the fuel that will propel us towards focusing our human factors training on the entire organization at every level.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned their simulation as being kind of something that really we are seeing the benefits of now. Again, I think probably no more than in your own field, simulation started out as a technical exercise, as a way of knowing that you knew the steps and the critical kind of decisions to be made. But more and more, I think we're seeing its use as a way of learning about teamwork and communication and all of the soft skills. I mean, does aviation spend a lot of time training people in those soft skills?
It's genuinely, and it's probably hard to believe for anybody from an industry outside of aviation. It's 50% now, and it's not just in training, but it's right back to the recruitment stage, where when I applied to become a pilot, the focus of the employer was how technically able, how academically able is this individual, and all my colleagues were recruited around the same time. I've been involved in recruitment extensively just prior to COVID for a number of airlines, and again, it's another stark indication of how things have changed. That the recruitment process is more on the human social skills than the academic skills. And it really has been a remarkable change. The recruitment process, starting with, after all the vetting is done, a group exercise where it's like a big basketball arena where the candidates are set up as groups, and the invigilators or the recruiting team who I was a member of would be monitoring individuals to see how they were reacting within the team. Basic social skills. So it starts at that point, and then throughout the career, 50% human behavior skills, the soft skills, 50% academic, traditional hard skills. And even the terminology, John, and I've said it before in presentations, we talk about the old traditional technical skills as being the hard skills. I think we've got that one wrong. They're the easy skills.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's the human behavior skills are the hard skills, and they take lifelong learning.
Yeah, it's one of those paradoxes, isn't it? It's the soft stuff is really the hard stuff. And I was interested, I suppose that idea that the pilot is a manager, and managing all the things that they have to hand, and managing for safety. And when do you start to train pilots in that? Is that done after they learn how to fly, or as they learn how to fly?
It's as they learn. So at every stage, it's genuinely a 50-50 split. the other associated idea with regard to being a manager, I can see a parallel with in primary care, where I think the modern GP has become very much a manager now, because it's become so much more complex. You know, we all had the vision of
Yeah.
the old family GP with his medical bag going out doing house calls, and life seemed simple back then, and maybe it wasn't. But now running a GP practice is such a complex undertaking that the, the, the modern GP surely is a manager, and does training cater for that? I'm not sure that it does.
Yeah, and I would say GP training probably, maybe out of all the trainings, is probably the best at catering for that. But yeah, does it even cater enough? And you're right. I mean, and the complexity, all the levers that are there. Um, and I think there's a lot to a lot to learn. I think from in every section of healthcare. I think from what you're talking about, and a lot of it is about understanding the work at hand, isn't it? And then I suppose where it's possible to design the work or the workplace. I mean, I know when you present for us, you look at the dashboard of the plane, and a lot of time and effort goes into designing that properly in the first place.
Yeah, so I think it's going back to the point that Paul O'Connor was making, that human factors isn't just about those simple subheadings. It should be in everything we do, and I think we're getting there. That in terms of checklist design, in terms of designing processes and procedures, recruitment, human factors comes into everything we do.
Yeah.
It's considered in every area, and I'd have a concern, and I don't want it to sound critical, but in healthcare, I'm not sure that at this stage it has even been decided, like, how much human factors training will a new recruit, a med student, a new nurse get? Is it defined anywhere? Now, we have the benefit of 40 years experience, plus the fact that it's mandated. It's in the regulations that pilots, cabin crew, maintenance personnel must do X number of hours during initial training, X number of hours of human factors training during recurrent training. I could be incorrect, but I don't think you define that.
Yeah, I think it's very piecemeal still. I mean, and people would get training in, what might be described as elements of human factors, let's say in communication or aspects of teamwork, or, like I said, in simulation work, kind of. But it's often bringing that together, I think, is one of the challenges, and I think it's a challenge for safety in general, is bringing together the different strands that come together to make safety, and I think that is a challenge for us.
But it goes back up the organization again, John. You know, the heads of the medical schools where this training is being done. I think if there was more buy-in to human behavior training and more understanding of how important it is for us at the front line, I think then they would be better equipped to define more clearly how much time in med school training, in nursing colleges, how much time should we be devoting? And I think if
Yeah.
that exercise was done, that's a start. And certainly Paul and Angelo D's introduction, it's a super introduction, but that really should be delivered at day one.
Yeah, yeah. And I think these are our challenges for the years ahead. I think we are still very siloed when it comes to a lot of this work. We tend most often to train people in their own groups, whereas I think it needs to be much more, cross training for safety, and And I think there is an emerging understanding, but I think it's going to take us time. But I think again, we've seen that from aviation, where the ideas and the models are there to show that it can be done. And I think that and like I said, and change can happen, because it wasn't always the way it was in your industry.
Well, I think it's very encouraging, John. Just if we take your simulator training alone, it's really encouraging how quickly you've embraced that, and as I've said, gone ahead of us in terms of how you deliver it, and how important it is to train the soft skills. I mean, simulator and simulation is such a super training platform. First of all, the one wonderful thing about it is there's no jeopardy. Nobody has
Yeah.
ever been, no passenger has ever been killed in a simulator. No crew member has ever been killed to my knowledge. And you have that benefit as well. There is no jeopardy. No patient is going to be harmed in simulation. But with buy-in, and I think there is almost immediate buy-in, because here are professionals who get an opportunity to practice in as close to real environment as possible. The stuff that they often wonder about day in, day out. What
Yeah.
if you can actually go and do it in a simulated environment? And from what I've seen of healthcare simulation, the debriefings afterwards are just outstanding in terms of the
Yeah.
focus on all these areas that we've talked about: good
Yeah.
communication, good social skills, good teamwork, good situational awareness, good decision making. The focus is there, and we lost so long before we realized that simulators could and should be used for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there have been also certain specialties or areas, certainly critical, ICU, emergency departments, where they've really embraced those that way of teaching. And I think it is really it is making a big difference, I think.
Yeah.
I'm just going to look at some of our comments there, Ciaran. There's certainly lots of good feedback there for the area of human factors, and for increasing its input into training of all staff. I think that's been recognised there. Lots of comments there from Kevin O'Flynn, and I think that is something that we will see, play a bigger role. Just briefly, I mean, human factors can be very encompassing, and in one sense it can cover everything. But the ideas of safety too, do you see that kind of in aviation? Where do you see that kind of starting to have an effect, or have you seen any examples of it? Because we're all the time struggling to see how we can really learn from excellence. And you mentioned a nice example of spills in the cockpit, which I thought was a good example of safety too.
Yeah, it's a relatively new concept for us, John, and that example probably is it's probably the clearest example. So in a cockpit between the captain and the co-pilot, there's a unit called a pedestal, and it's a raised platform that carries all the radio and nav sets. And so a lot of avionics there, a lot of electrical power supply, and beverages, so the tea and coffee and the water that were being brought into the cockpit by the cabin crew were frequently spilled in this area. It was a big problem. Now, an aircraft can continue to fly with a faulty radio and a faulty nav set and a faulty radar, but it was costly. It reduced the safety margin, and it was an issue that was causing concern. And lots of people came up with different solutions. So only cups with the takeaway cups with the plastic cap on it, only they could be used coming into the cockpit. But people were reaching around for those and grabbing them and squeezing them, and the lid would pop off, and they were still getting spillages. But one particular airline, during an audit where a pilot was observing his colleagues from the jump seat at the back of the cockpit, just noticed a captain who had briefed his cabin crew that when the beverages were being brought into the cockpit, could they be passed over his left shoulder, which is just beside the windscreen? And there's no equipment over there, no electrical cabling or supplies or equipment. And he was doing that and had been doing it for years and years and years. Now, had somebody checked his stats, he probably would never have had a spillage over an avionic unit. But somebody said, well, that's surely a practical solution. And this is, nobody had seen it. The system hadn't picked it up.
Yeah.
Because it's in that safety 2 area. It's something that's just done every day. No bells, alarms are going off, bringing the attention of the safety management system to it. But it was valuable information.
Yeah.
And now,
and I think that's such a nice example. Because I think we've got so many of those examples in healthcare, of, and so much stuff does go right. And again, it's just, I suppose, recognizing the positive deviance, people who have solved problems and, able to get that message out there and share those solutions. Oh, Ciaran, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk. We could stay here for much longer, and I think I've gained so much from our conversations over the years. And thank you. You've always been there for a good chat and a discussion, and thank you for being here with us on QPS Talk Time.
It's always an honor, John, and all I can hope for is that the conversation continues. It's two-way. We benefit back in the 70s. We've had to reach out to you again relatively recently, back in 2015. I don't know, well, I'm sure you remember Andreas Lubitz, the Germanwings co-pilot,
Yes.
who had reached burnout. The system didn't pick it up, and he locked his captain out of the cockpit on a flight returning to Germany, and brought himself, the crew, and 449 passengers to their deaths.
Yeah.
We had to reach out to you again in healthcare to say, how do we deal with this?
Yeah.
What are the signs? How do we support these people? How do we mitigate this kind of thing happening again? So
Yeah.
it's two-way, and I'm convinced it's got to continue. So
yeah,
thanks to
me
you
too.
again.
Thanks, Ciaran. Okay, folks, I'm just going to wrap up there and just a quick shout out to the QPS Ireland network map. Please follow the link there and join the map. Tell us who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and then the map will be there to share. Please consider becoming a Q member, and anybody who's interested, please contact our colleague Caroline Lennon-Nally. Her email there. And just a quick shout out before we finish up, for really to build on our conversation with Ciaran here today, which is Dr. Adrian Plunkett, who's a pediatric intensivist at Birmingham Children's Hospital. We're going to be talking about learning from excellence and appreciative inquiry. And he and his colleagues have set up the Learning from Excellence community in the UK. And I know there's a lot of people in Ireland who are interested in this as well. So we're going to be talking with Adrian in a few weeks' time after Easter. So thank you for joining us. Let us know how we did today. Please fill in your pop-up when you get it. And if you'd like to contact Noemi, her email is there for any ideas or topics that you'd like to see covered on Talk Time. So until next time, thank you very much for joining us. And thanks to Noemi and Shima and Maureen for all their work in the background as ever. Well done, folks. And see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.